So just to kind of reconnect into the intent of our time together and this online foundations program is that, you know, we know that we need to work differently. That's why everybody's here. We're interested in kind of evolving practice into different spaces or growing the way that we're already working differently, because the way that government has tried to tackle challenging issues in the past hasn't really resulted in the outcomes that we were anticipating or hoping for, and people are looking for different ways to work. And so this is a group with a shared interest in that work, and we know that what that means is going past tools and kind of simple responses and methods, and really building our capacity to grapple with the complexity of equity, of the complexity of intergenerational wellbeing, and expanding our ability to hold those bigger tensions and issues whilst taking action every day on the ground, and not get paralyzed by the bigness of it, but still hold the kind of tension and the complexity of what's there. And design approaches, participatory approaches help with that, but only if they're grounded in a critical way, grounded in a way that's connected to Aotearoa and to place. And that helps us grow a more intentional practice rather than just picking tools and methods from wherever. We need to have them grounded in this complexity and in the work that we're trying to do. So we've structured the program with that intent in mind, and to be able to traverse the idea of what we can take from design, but in the way that it helps us think more critically about where we are and how we work with each other, how we work in ways that are transformational or with a transformational intent rather than a transactional intent, and how we can build that learning capacity of how we will do this together in as we go, and the kind of working towards different outcomes and what that means. So the program is set up to help us thread those things. There is an intent that the Thursday sessions tend to have more in them, and the Friday session is an opportunity to listen to practitioners from around the motu sharing their work, and it's a bit more conversational and there's less kind of jammed in it, partly because it's Friday, so Thursday's quite full, and then on Friday we just try and have that morning to hear and converse. So they've sort of set up with that kind of balance or attempted balance in them as we go through the week. So less about specific tools and methods and more about mindsets and principles and the foundations that we hope help you build the frameworks for your own practice, what makes sense in your different contexts and where you're working in and the knowledge that you already have. So we appreciate that you've stepped into a sort of unknown space and the bravery that comes with that. And we could really see, you know, from the feedback from last week, we started just touching on some things and connecting and looking at the foundations star questions as we talked to them. And people gave that feedback of, you know, really enjoying the kōrero from Roy, of being able to connect and reflect on your own practice, but also being stretched and kind of challenged within that, wanting to go further and unpack some of these things, but also how we do this with care. So how we ask some of these challenging things and really reflect on practice in a way that, that holds us in a space of care. And so the invitation there is to just be noticing of that, to reach out and connect with each other. And we're always here to have conversations and just kind of connect in about things that might be coming up around practice. So in terms of today, the key message for this session is very similar to last time. You know, where we are and who we are and how we work really matters. And we just, for us, what's been helpful just as a simple framing is if we want to get to a different place, we need to start in a different place. So what does starting differently look like? And we'll share some of the thoughts as we go around what we think, well, starting differently for some, in some contexts. Perhaps a lot of what we're doing is returning to existing knowledge systems and actually just having to unlearn some of the colonial and iwi knowledge systems. So perhaps it's not new, it's also just reconnecting with knowledge systems and practices that have been there for a long time. So today we start in the foundation space again and just kind of work through some of these ideas of what is working in complexity and what are some of the things that we're learning are helpful from our perspective to hold us in that space. And then we move more into how is the design process showing up and what are some practice examples of that. And Angie and the whānau that are at Papakura Marae this morning will help us share their own experiences of working in this way and what it's meant for them. So we'll kind of hear a practical story about that. And similarly tomorrow when we hear from Tukuna Te Raki, we'll be hearing about their the way they've taken these things up. Just want to do a check-in with everybody before we move in and just land on where everybody is today. So Baruch will put a link to a Slido in the chat. And the invitation is just to think, well, how's my waka? How am I going today? And this is a question that we've started using internally in our team. Last week, Roy took us on a sort of journey through the Hotu waka. And what was in that was the different kind of phases and stages and ways in which waka is in its journey. And it can be steady, it can be rough, it can be circling, it can be directional. But it's just a gentle way for us to check in. So the invitation is to jump into the meadow and just let us know, how's your waka today? Cool, so we can get a little sense of kind of how the group's going. Cool, so we've got quite a mix here. People are in some different spaces and phases, some steady, quite a lot of circling, some open and looking for tohu, some a bit rough, bit discombobulated, bit unsettled, bit directionless. So just be kind of tapped into that when you're jumping in groups a bit later on, that where people are in different spaces and kind of listening out for the different sort of places that people are in at the moment with their practice and with their thinking. So I'm just going to check in. Everybody can see the word cloud? Yeah, awesome, cool. So I figured that out. I couldn't get that to work last week. So we can share in each other's expressions today. Awesome. So that's going to keep building up. We can check back in. And some really nice kind of balances of, you know, like exhausted but interested. You know, we're here, but we've got to recognize that it's already been an incredibly long year and we're just up to May. So we'll try and go easy. It's Thursday. We've still got another session tomorrow. So just landing back into this idea of the kind of foundations that sit underneath the practice. I'm going to talk to that a little bit and introduce some ideas that we can just play with. We'll have a break and then come back to this idea of design and practice. So last week we started with this idea of, you know, well, what do we mean by designing for equity and how do we locate our practice within these more complex ideas? And we use the foundation star as a start point to do that. And what, at its simplest, we think it means having practices that keep those bigger pictures in view and also understanding our capacity to influence, no matter where we are operating in the system or what our everyday work is. There's capacity for us to be thinking about questions of equity and well-being and exercising choices about that all the time actively. And so we're trying to sort of tune how that shows up. What we've also found useful internally as a team is this other view that we've been using. And this is, so the star is one way of thinking about it. This view shifts us into, or helps us think about systems and where we are in the context of systems and what sets the conditions for well-being. And so this is a very simple version of the socio-ecological model if people are similar with that idea, and I can share some links with you if it's not familiar, but it locates what happens to us as people, as family, as whānau, you know, within the broader context of what's going on and the environment and what's outside in the informal networks and communities and the structures and in the power influences. And it's also really important from our perspective to be thinking about what's going on for families in the context of what's happened in the past, the story of place, the colonial, ongoing sort of colonial context that Aotearoa has. And so all those broader things of environment and history play a significant role in setting the conditions for well-being. And this view is important from our perspective for a few different things. And one of them is because when we think about wellbeing and wellbeing interventions or trying to respond to wellbeing, it's really common that we jump straight to a sort of fixing mode of interventions and thinking about what's going on for people, what's wrong for people, and how might we get in there. Where in actual fact, there's so many other parts of what actually sets up the conditions and the influences for outcomes at a family level. And so this view really just helps us to think about all the different things and all the different levers and potential influences that can act on whānau outcomes, but also how much our everyday actions can either be enhancing the opportunity for equity or potentially compounding the status quo. And when we zoom out, and I'm sure this is not unfamiliar for lots of you, when we start to unpack experiences that whānau have, when they interact with places, spaces, services, often we're actually, whether the intent is the best intent, we're often compounding inequity. We're often shaming people, creating spaces of judgment, creating exclusionary spaces. And in fact, we might be doing one great thing on one side, but then just down the road, people have a counter experience that just recreates the status quo of the power structures that are in play at the moment. So having that sense of the capacity for influence either way and kind of tuning to that is really important. And we think about, say, for example, the child and youth wellbeing strategy that's got amazing sets of outcomes, but lots of the focus at the moment is still actions and interventions. We've got the opportunity to think about what does that look like at a systems community view and have that broader view of how we can influence. And so having that systems view and holding that is one of the ways of starting, making sure we're starting at a different start point and not just zooming in to think only at a micro view of what's going on for families outside of the broader historic and systems context. One of the ways that we start thinking about this is to work big and small. So definitely working with people in place, connected to the realities of people's everyday lives, which design helps us to do to unpack what's going on, but always holding in bigger view the historical and structural conditions that contribute to equity or inequity at the same time. And a lot of our practice historically has not encouraged us to hold those things. We often talk about scoping down or just working within a certain scope. And in actual fact, what that does is often allow us to kind of ignore some of the bigger things and just focus on just smaller areas that in fact don't have influence. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't keep doing what we're doing, but how do we do what we're doing with a much broader view, and what does that create for opportunities for thinking about making sure that the actions are enhancing equity and not inadvertently compounding inequity. And this, lots of people are working on this sort of stuff in different ways, and we're just sort of sharing some of the things that we're using in this space. And connecting to story and history of place is one of the ways of doing that, and just challenging ourselves, to consider what other things are interconnected to the actions that we're taking. So that can, there's some links here if people are interested in a broader view of the model. You can dive into the background of what that is. But we just wanted to talk about things that have been helpful for us to just ground ourselves. That's a really big set of pictures and a really big set of things to try and hold in your head in one go, all the different influences that come for outcomes. So how do we do that but keep going and not feel paralyzed by the complexity actually of all the things that have impact? And so we're going to just share some of the practices that help us to anchor in continuing to do things and continuing to act, but being mindful actually of the other layers and complexities that are in play. And I'm sure there would be a much more savvy way of presenting these or naming them, but at the moment we're just calling them 7 things that we have found matter and help ground us to operate and continue to act within the context though of holding that broader kind of systems and complexity view. And so I'm just going to very quickly provide a quick description of each of them, and then we're going to jump into the Miro board and just spend a little bit of time familiarizing with what these are and testing them out and playing with them, and we're very open to them being challenged or revised and renamed and things like that, but just sort of play with these ideas and see how they relate to your world or your work or your way of working. So the idea of being anchored to place, to history, to whenua, and acknowledging what has happened in that space, what that space represents and what's been there, and building a connection to place as well. Culturally grounded, so the holistic view where our approaches and actions and concepts are guided by the cultural context of place and people, and in Aotearoa that starts with Te Ao Māori. Strengths-based, so that's a term that's probably very familiar, building on the capacities of people in place, so enhancing protective factors, thinking about what is already there that we can grow and that we can enhance, whilst also acknowledging the challenges and realities that whānau and communities experience. So it's not a rose-tinted approach, but it is a building on capacities approach. Responsive to complexity, so being able to hold the dynamics that are in play and respond in ways that admit to the fact that we don't have control over things. We shouldn't expect to have control over things. We shouldn't expect to be able to reduce things down to very simple answers. You know, oftentimes we're very keen to find a silver bullet, and that's not what's going to get us to addressing equity or promoting equity. We need to be able to hold more complex responses than single intervention responses, or imagine that we can have control over complicated situations. Localizing the evidence, and that really just means we want to work with evidence, but be conscious of where the evidence comes from, and that evidence grows in place. So how things show up and how things work are contextual to place. So how do we connect what might be in literature or from other places? What does that actually look like here? And what do we know that's already in traditional knowledge bases about place and how the world works? The local view systems lens, how do we be both? So that diagram is a little bit holding of that. How do we be in place and think in place, but not disconnect from broader system? And then one of the almost core anchors, I guess, that we'll talk more about today and tomorrow, that can really hold you stable in a very complex setting, is being values and principles led. And for lots of people, this is absolutely the natural way they operate. Oftentimes though, in a tauiwi context, values don't get talked about. It doesn't mean they're not there, they're just implicit. So the practice of really surfacing those and starting with those. So that's just a very quick look across these 7 things. And now we're going to give you the opportunity to just spend 5 minutes in the Meadow board, cruising across. If you have any problems, ping Lee Ryan in the comments. Just dive in, do some kind of processing, have a play, leave some comments, leave thoughts or critiques, anything you connect to, what you think's missing, things you'd like to explore more in the Miro board for 5 minutes. And then we're going to come back out and have a bit of a conversation in some smaller groups, and an opportunity for you to connect in again with a different group of people than who you connected in with last week. So I will stop talking now, and you can jump into the Miro board, and we'll just spend a couple of minutes kind of processing that and cruising around in there and zooming in and out, as Brooke said. Hopefully I can see that most people are in the Meadow. If you've had any issues, just let us know, let Lee Ryan know through the chat, and we can sort you out. And if you, for whatever reason, didn't get in there, don't worry, just ride with the conversation. The next little bit is to have a little breakout. So Brooke or Lee will put us into some small groups, same as last time. So take the time to introduce yourselves first, and then just in the space that's left, a conversation about one of the things that stood out for you, or one of the 7 things that you connected to most. So just take the time to check in, say hello if they're people that you don't know, and have a conversation about something that stood out for you in those 7 things. So Baroque, if you could flip us in, and we'll probably just have about 9 or 10 minutes. So hopefully you just had a little bit of time to connect, maybe meet someone new, have a little conversation. There's some really, really rich conversation already happening in the Meadow board. So I know some people are still needing some troubleshooting to get in, so we'll just keep helping make sure that happens. But yeah, some really awesome conversation and comments and feedback already in there. So thank you. What we'll do now, actually, just for cognitive load, is just have a break. And then we'll come back in and we'll start to kind of unpack this sort of design as a start point and have a conversation korero with the whānau and Angie. So 10:24 we'll start again. So just time to step back, grab a drink of water. I don't know if people can, it's sunny here in Auckland. Maybe I shouldn't say that because I don't know what it's like across the rest of the country, but look out the window. So yeah, 10:24, we'll see you back here for the rest of the session. Kia ora.
Thank you.
As you come in, just if you can turn your screens back on and then we'll know people are here. So hopefully just had a little refresh, reset for the Thursday morning. Some really powerful conversations and questions, as I said, that we'll try and just keep returning to them over the next few weeks, creating space to have conversations, but also feel free to build on those and pick up on those yourself in those 7 things. One of the questions that was in there, or sort of little conversations that was happening, was around how do you enact principles? Very easy to have principles or to write them at the front of a document, to put them on a website, but what does it mean to have them as lived and active? And that's something that that we'll be hearing a bit more about from Angie today. And then there's also some other sort of challenges and unpacks there that will be really great to pick back up on and thread through. So we'll just hold this board as a bit of an ongoing conversation throughout the weeks. So I'm just going to jump back into, or at least I'm going to attempt to jump back into the screen share. So I just want to provide a little sort of potted history from one perspective anyway of design in this context. And I'll just try and step through it fairly quickly, but just to sort of give us a little bit of a shared reference or landscape, and people will have different experiences and ways of talking about this, but just to give us a kind of one start point around this term or idea of design-led practice. And design can be really useful. You know, it centers with lived experience. It really focuses on actually what's going on for people in particular places, and in that way can really help us reframe questions and look at things in a different way. But it's not a neutral practice, and we need to be really critical of how we're applying it and in the ways in which we're applying it and what we're actually applying. So it's not an off-the-shelf neutral thing that we just start doing. It really does need some examination in terms of its origins and the actual practice and what's embedded in some of the assumptions around the practice. And so I'm just going to give a bit of context for what I mean around that. And just if people are interested, there's an enormous energy around unpacking the origins of design. One of the very most popular US webinars by Creative Reaction Lab is actually about how traditional design thinking protects white supremacy. One of the most interesting things in that work is how significant pace and working fast is as an action of white supremacy. So there's a lot of material out there if you're interested in unpacking that kind of stuff, and we can share some links, but I'm just going to do a bit of a background to design and lend us on how we're thinking about and using that terminology and set of practices, evolving practices. So first of all, we would see design as a sort of continuum. You can be at the end where you're practicing, it might be called user-centered design, where you think what's going on for people and how are things showing up for them, and human-centered design, and that's great. Often it means sort of taking a person-led approach, but you might still be holding on to a lot of the decision-making. Further along the continuum, and this is not dissimilar to the participation ladder or the IAP2 model of engagement, where you've got sort of inform and consult at one end and empower at the other. There's some relationships to that on this continuum. In the middle, we've sort of got where we're working together collectively, and we are sharing values, we are sharing outcomes, and we're kind of doing some co-deciding, co-design. Going further up the line where it's actually whānau-led or whānau-led innovation, and whānau are actually leading the design process, making the decisions, and that's more the space where you're likely to get more transformative outcomes, and there's a real power shift actually taking place. And it's fine that we're anywhere on these continuums as long as we know where we are on it and what the kind of realistic scope and outcomes and practice is along that space. So sometimes, so the term co-design is really problematic because we use it in all sorts of ways, and in the end it doesn't come to mean anything, because sometimes it just means poor consultation described in a different word. And so the intent of the co-design of the co-part often gets left behind. So just to be quite critical of how we're using those terms and what we mean, and we can kind of think about it along this continuum. One of the ways that we think about it is really you're trying to create a framework for collaboration and people being able to bring different thoughts and experiences and work together in different ways. Within a treaty context, co-design has a different and specific almost obligation and responsibility under Crown iwi relations, and Te Ara Whiti has started to work with the terminology of co-design in their kind of frameworks around what it looks like for Crown or government to work with iwi. So they locate co-design within the partnership model. And so the other thing that I think is really useful for people sometimes coming to design is that the history of design is shared across lots of different practices. Often when people start being introduced to the idea of design, they think this is really familiar. I know this practice, and it will be because it's got lots of similarities to community engagement, to participatory action research. Design's a bit of a magpie of a discipline. It just grabs anything that it thinks is interesting from anywhere. So often if it feels similar to what you already do, it's because it is. So your experience of design will be different depending on what way you came through. And there's a sort of social participatory school of design, and then there's a design management, business, sort of user experience school of design. So depending on how you kind of came to it, you'll have collected different ideas and ideologies and things along the way. One of the things that I think is significant to acknowledge is that the dominant discourse of design internationally, at least until in the last couple of years, has very much been as a Western paradigm. What's much more visible now is the practice of innovation and design that sits within Indigenous knowledge systems that has always been there, but hasn't been as visible in the dominant discourse, Western discourse about design. So that's much more visible and stronger and evolving as a set of practices here in the Pacific, in Australia, and worldwide. What design looks like is often what you see. So there's lots of different versions of what design might be. A really classic one is the bottom left-hand corner, the double diamond, which comes from the Design Council. They've recently evolved that a little bit to add some systems kind of lenses to it. But you'll see lots of different ways of interpreting what a design process feels like, looks like, how it shows up. And more, as I said, you'll see Indigenous practitioners, Māori practitioners, bringing forward what their design practice and innovation practice looks like. And last week, Roy took us through Hautu Waka. That can be understood as an innovation methodology, innovation practice. They all have the similarity of kind of journeying to new places, but how they show up and how they're thought about differs depending on kind of almost like their origin story, if you like. One thing that was powerful in the kōrero from Roy last week was the kind of mindset, skill sets, heart sets, observations that you bring to the practice and how the different states feel and the way you need to be aware and conscious of the different places that you're in the journey. And what I think's the sort of message out of this is the mindsets that sit under the practice of moving between the different phases and states of a complex journey and understanding when to stop, when to pause, when to move, when to act, when to try something different is as important as any process or how it looks. So the way of being in this work is really the thing to kind of hold on to. And you can choose however you want to represent it, what makes sense for you in that place, what is the right framework or way of articulating that will depend on where you are and who you're working with. So just in summary, before I hand over to Angie to kind of take us on a particular example, the message from this is that, you know, design isn't neutral. So it does have the potential to advance equity and well-being, and it equally has the potential to compound it and reinforce the status quo. And that is, you know, some of its weaknesses are that it's traditionally been a Eurocentric model. It often puts a project mindset around things, not a relational mindset or a transformative mindset. It often focuses on individuals and says, we'll just scope down to this thing rather than the interconnected whole. You have to force it back to a system space. And it can really focus us on sort of processes and tools and things over people and capacity. So it has these sort of weaknesses that I think we need to be aware of. And it traditionally has not been explicit enough about power. It's kind of presented itself as a neutral sort of practice. And from our perspective, those 7 things that we explored, if you're kind of anchored on those, they help ensure that your design practice is an equity informed practice rather than unintentionally actually acting out a bunch of principles that aren't taking or are compounding inequity rather than the other way around. So all of this is in the slides. We can come back to it and talk more about these things, but that just lays some background context for our use of this term and our thinking about design. And so hopefully, I'm just going to look around. Do we have Angie on the call at this point?
Here I am. I'm ready to go.
Kia ora. I'm going to hand over to you, Ange. I'll just hold the screen sharing on. You tell me when to turn it off. Eh?
That would be great if you just go to our first slide. Well, kia ora whānau. It's my pleasure to talk about what we would say is a tikanga-led practice to support whānau-led systems innovation, and it's been an evolving practice, and we're still learning about it. So I just want to acknowledge what I'm about to talk about. There have been many contributors to this mahi, including my colleagues in the Southern Initiative, the Co-Design Lab here at Papakura Marae, and of course the stars of the show who you're going to hear from shortly, He Whānau Whānui o Papakura. But if I just start by saying this work in my journey in the tamariki wellbeing work for the Southern Initiative has prompted us to think about how we draw upon different knowledge systems to create a practice and a space to create compelling alternatives for our whānau, because we know status quo for some of our whānau is embedding or increasing inequity. And what we were drawing upon at the start of this mahi was the lived experience of whānau, Western knowledge, and matauranga Māori. And trying to triangulate all of those knowledge systems to understand how we could be behaving, acting, engaging, working differently alongside whānau to create these compelling alternatives. For myself, it was really, really important, as Penny was saying, to think about design as a container, as a process for innovation, but to recognise that it needs to be contextualised. And for our whānau, for me, that was about thinking through how we use or how we draw on matauranga Māori, and particularly tikanga in the practice. And that's really important because whānau told us it was important to them. It's important because whānau are telling us the way that we are inside of the process, the space that's curated, the way that they're nurtured and cared for, the way that they're enabled to lead is as important as the work that we are doing. And it can yield immediate outcomes for whānau. So we started to think about how do we intentionally and consciously draw upon tikanga Māori practices and principles as a way of guiding how we are inside of the innovation process and how we are in relationship with whānau as equal collaborators in an innovation process. And so I was drawing on all of the amazing work that's been developed, kaupapa Māori methodology, practice and principles, particularly Te Ara Tika, and all of the amazing Māori academic bodies of work that have been developed that talk about how we might do that through a tikanga lens, through a matauranga lens. And what we landed on was thinking about how do we ensure that within the practice and in the process, we are ensuring whanaungatanga, manakitanga, mana, and rangatiratanga, as well as ako, that we're delivering on we're using those principles and delivering on those values inside of the process as we do the work and as we work with whānau. So I'll just touch on each of these principles and talk through what that actually looks like in the practice. So when I'm talking about manakitanga, I get to work alongside the amazing Celia Hirini here at Papakura Marae, because Papakura Marae is our innovation partner here in Papakura for this work. And our job is to figure out when we're engaging and supporting whānau and moving through this innovation process, how are we nurturing and caring for whānau in a genuine and an authentic way within the process. And for us, that means we make sure that the tamariki can be cared for well, that there's kai here, that we're thinking about how we support whānau to participate fully. And we ask whānau what's needed to be able to do so, and we try our best to accommodate that. Really, it's about, for me, it's about how am I caring for each of our whānau inside of the process and beyond. Because it's not just about how we care for whānau in the work, but it's just generally how we care for each other. The second one is almost, I feel, the cornerstone of all of the principles, and that is, how do we establish genuine, authentic relationships that are enduring? And how do we make sure we've got time to build these relationships with each other, because it's the strength of the relationship that carries us through an innovation process that is quite often unclear, uncertain, ambiguous. So the strength of our relationships and our ability to care for each other, be honest with each other, and to trust each other is critical. Tino rangatiratanga, we've been thinking about this, if this is the right way to talk about this, and it sort of also refers to mana and mana motuhaki and other concepts. But for me, what was critical was for me to start to think about how are we sharing and shifting power inside of the process. And that means as we're moving through the process or circling in the process or going back to the start of the process, how are we enabling decision-making opportunities for whānau in the process? So they're no longer passive participants in a process. They're making decision, whether that's about what we're resourcing, what we're doing, what we're prioritizing, what insights are important. They are now making decisions in the process that traditionally agencies may. Mana really is about acknowledging whānau as the experts they are in their own lived experience, but as the amazingly talented innovators that they are as well. So how are we creating conditions where, when we're working with agencies, or even when we're just working with our whānau and supporting our whānau to lead the process, how are we making sure that everybody is being acknowledged for their expertise, their experience, their potential in the process? And what that looks like for me particularly is when we are co-creating with agencies, everybody in the room are acknowledged as equals in the innovation process. Whether you work for Auckland Council or you're a leader from our rōpū, he whānau whānui or Pabukura, everybody has equal mana, has equal status, has equal contribution in the room. And the last principle really is talking about that we are all on a learning journey, and I've tried to be upfront with our whānau here that we really want to be doing something differently and we want to be trying things. That means we don't always know what's coming immediately in terms of the co-creation process or what we come up with. But the main thing to say is we don't have all the answers, but we think whānau do. And we want whānau to be supported to lead out the design of their own local fit for purpose, compelling alternatives to the status quo. So it's really about just being upfront that for us to do better, for us to try different things, we are in a learning process. It means that we will make some mistakes, and it means some things won't work, but that's the nature of innovation. And the power of these tikanga, when you start to draw on these tikanga as a way of guiding how you are inside the process, how you engage with whānau, how you are in relationship with whānau, and how you are in relationship with agencies, is that you start to create some conditions where whānau can feel a sense of connection, that they are being heard, a validation of their experiences and of their expertise. And we'll talk a little bit about this when the whānau share their experiences, but it actually can be quite healing and empowering process if the conditions have been curated for it to be so. And that's particularly when our whānau are engaging with agency leaders or with people that we perceived to have power and influence inside of system. So that was my focus has been to figure out what that tikanga process looks like and codify that to share with others, not exactly what we're doing, but to be able to share how these principles guide us in the way that we're working together and moving through an innovation process. But if Penny goes to the next slide, what I've been really interested in is also how does tikanga, or how do our principles guide us in the way that we think about systems innovation and systems change. And if we think about mana, for example, it's a really useful way of thinking about how power can be shifted and shared inside of system, or in environments where power's held or it's centralized. And so what I like to do, and it's a little bit, it's related to what I was just talking about in terms of how do you curate situations and environments where everybody's acknowledged. What I like to do is I like to think about how are we in all of our interactions with whānau and agencies, shifting the power that might be perceived to be sitting centrally inside of agencies, shifting it to whānau, or shifting it at outside of agencies, so whānau can feel like they're being heard and they have some power and control in terms of the process, but also in terms of the implementation and the ongoing innovation work. If Penny will just go forward, I think there's another part left on this slide. Yeah. So the particular tactics that we think about when we think about everybody needs to have their mana acknowledged and nurtured inside of these processes, and that needs to be mana oriti, which is everybody has equal mana in this process, no matter who you are, where you work, or where you come from. Then the types of things that we do to make sure that that is being acknowledged inside of the innovation process with agencies present is that whānau determine the rules of engagement. They determine what they need to be in the process, what's important to them. What's important to them is really, really interesting and critical, because often what we think is needed and we design for in terms of services and intervention is quite often not what's important to whānau, but our whānau will talk to you about that. So who's determining value is important. It's an important way of thinking about how we share power. In our instance, our whānau are technical experts in terms of co-design, the co-design process and the tools that we use. So we spend time working through those tools, and whānau use them and actively lead out the work inside of the innovation process. We are very explicit in the way that we reciprocate whānau contribution inside of the innovation process. That means whether that's koha or other ways that whānau determined to be appropriate, there's always a reciprocity of what whānau are contributing in the process. And also, and the most important is that we are doing our best to create the conditions, enable the conditions where whānau can actively lead out the process rather than being participants. So that's probably enough talking from me, and the whānau are ready to go and have a little chat to you about what their experiences have been in this process. I'll just give a little bit, we'll go to the next slide, and I'll just give you an introduction to this pretty amazing work that I feel so privileged to be a part of, and so privileged to work alongside Celia to support our amazing wahine and whānau here in Papakura. And so the work really has been to think about what can we do differently to give our tamariki the best start in life here in Papakura. And what are the compelling alternatives that whānau might design and lead? We didn't know what it looked like. The invitation was for whānau was just to come on board and to work with us, work alongside us as equals in an innovation process that was geared at just focusing on better outcomes for our tamariki. So they trusted us at the start, and we're so grateful because we didn't know what it was going to look like. We were learning too. And the next slide will show you a bunch of our whānau together and agencies in a co-design sprint. So this was a time when we were co-creating together, and we created some amazing prototypes, which we're now testing. The potential of them is incredible. We haven't got time to go into them today, but we co-created 3 prototypes, which we've tested one. We've done 2 rounds of testing for one. We're about to test another one with agencies. So if we go to the next slide. So moving from what can we do differently for better outcomes for tamariki, we started to think about, well, what does it mean to enable whānau to lead the innovation process that will create these compelling alternatives to the status quo? So what can we do differently other than services, programs and intervention? Not saying that they're not required, but what might we do differently based on whānau lived experience and the strengths of whānau? And then secondly, what does it look like for a reconfiguration of resource or systems focus on to support those compelling alternatives here and Papakura. And we'll go to the next, how might we, and this is how we describe our work now, and basically that is to say, how might we enable whānau-led systems innovation for thriving tamariki futures? So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to hand it, Penny can stop sharing, thanks Penny. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand it over to the whānau to introduce themselves briefly, and then they're going to talk to their experience of leading this type of innovation process. They are the most generous, brave, resilient, innovative wahine toa that you'll meet. So it's a real privilege to introduce these wonderful wahine. So I'll hand it over to the wahine, and they'll also, aroha mai, we're having a little technical issue. So I've got a few people in the room. We'll do our best to make sure that you can hear us. I'll hand it over to the whānau, and they're gonna do a little introduction.
Hi, my name's Rawania. I am a mother of 5, 1 on the way, so 6.
Cool.
Yep. Hey everybody, my name is Jenny Cowell, mother of 6. What did I say, 7? I have my nephew in my care full time, and I've been raised here in Papakura since my young teen days.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Roxanne. I am a mother to a 19-month-old daughter and currently 32 weeks pregnant with our son. Yeah.
Kia ora te whānau. My name is Colleen Quinney. I've been living in Papakura since I was 5 years old, so it's been 25 plus years. I am a mother of 7 lovely babies, 2 which came from a previous relationship. So, but yeah.
So the experience for me, being the whole process from the start, has been really rewarding in a way for me, because before I started this process, I had really bad social anxiety. You couldn't get me out of the house to engage with anybody. I wouldn't engage with any service. I'll just basically shut the door on you, because my experiences in the past with services and government agencies wasn't that great. So being able to work alongside the agencies themselves and have our voice heard has been a huge reward for us, because I see it as whānau are getting their voice across and whānau are being able to have their own voice heard. But we've also had opportunities where we've been able to share our stories without being judged and had given that opportunity to also heal by sharing our stories without being judged. And yeah, just the whole experience for me has been really rewarding, and it's made me come so far from where I was when I first started. I can now get up in front of a group of 100 and I can have a big kōrero without being shy. Back when this first started, you would never see me doing that. So yeah, the experience for me has been really rewarding, and I have a lot to thank Angie and Celia for starting this process with us, because it's been great.
For me joining this group, I joined this group because I needed new friends. I didn't really have anybody. I was isolated and I had trust issues, especially with government agencies. I didn't have many good experiences with them. Not because they told me no, but because just the way they said no wasn't genuine. It was just no, get lost. So it got to the point where I just stopped asking for help. Being here, I've learned how to trust again. I still have trust issues, but now I don't think everybody's an enemy. I don't just turn everybody away now. And I've learned to listen to what other people have to say rather than just judge them and just, nah, I don't want to know you. So it's helped me heal a bit. I still have quite a long way to go, but now I know like where I'm starting.
Just about how we came here, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's cold. You guys are doing great.
Turn a block the light for you guys. So with me, I think it's built a lot of confidence. I look at the agencies differently, being a part of this rōpū. Before, it was hard. So in the beginning, I would tell you, I'm going to tell you the truth. In the beginning, I came for free food. I wasn't really interested in what was going on. Yeah, I wasn't. I was like, my sister told me, hey, there's free food down there and you get a voucher. So I'm not going to lie, I came for that. I have so many kids, so that was extra bit of food there for my babies. And then, in saying that, when I did come here, I don't want to leave. I love it. I see a different side to the agencies now, because we had that. Because we've had a few things with the agencies, and just knowing that they're normal people like us, they go through the same sort of problems. However, they're on that side wearing the hat. I always call it, like, I always say that if you take the hat off, say please hat, whatever hat, and then you actually talk to the people or to our whānau how we want to be talked to, like just normal people, ordinary people, I think you get a lot further. I've seen it, honestly, it's worked. Yeah, I like the place, once I had a lot of problems with them because I was working, and then I had to, I had kids to look after. So I thought, no, stuff this, I'm not working, I'm going to look after my babies. And just that transition from working into going into the benefit, that's what sort of got me. Because that whole transition, I thought it would be better. It is, half of it is, but half of it wasn't. So in saying that, yeah, I have a whole change of how I think about the agencies now. Just being a part of this group.
So that's some experiences of our whānau, what it means to lead out this type of process and what it means to be seen as equals to those that are perceived to have power and control, and to be moved towards centralised power, and for us to think about how we move out power. But we're going to just show you some slides now. I'm really cognizant of time, and so don't be freaked out by how many words is on these slides, and you'll get them. But based on what our whānau we're just telling you, I just want to draw your attention to some key points. The first is that what makes this process so powerful for people is that they, what the whānau are talking about and have told me is that they have new friendships, they have a purpose in the work, which is about our tamariki. They've built their social capital. They've come to a safe and welcoming space they might not have had before to be in with their children. Nobody judges them. They've now got a network of support and connections that will be enduring after this work. And they really are like a little whānau. And most importantly, what whānau have told us is that if these conditions are enabled, then it can be a really healing process. So if I just go quickly to the next slide, Penny. And so what we think the potential of the work, we've got some prototypes that we're testing is, we think whānau can reimagine how we support and respond to whānau in a fundamentally different way by building on our strengths and by scaling manaakitanga and whanaungatanga within our community, particularly around building resilient whānau to whānau networks, where the whānau network becomes the first protocol, the first place to ask for information or for help, but also that those networks are activated when you're well, but also if you need help. So it's activated all the time. We're not just waiting for whānau to go into crisis. But if we think about that, there's two really important things. Firstly, what's the invitation for whānau into trust and into relationship? And in our opinion, that needs to be from whānau to whānau and based on what's important for whānau. But also, how can all of these interactions, spaces, places, and processes become opportunities for healing? And what our whānau have talked about is that healing looks like opportunities to be heard, opportunities to be acknowledged, opportunities to lead, opportunities to help other people. That's what healing looks like for whānau. And the last slide is a little bit of a whittle to everybody online, to our agency, to think about, if you want to do this work, if you want to support whānau-led innovations for compelling alternatives that are strength-based, outcomes-focused, localised, then think about how we can be sharing power with whānau and how it can be a healing experience for whānau. And that means creating legitimate platforms for them to participate and actually have decision-making and power and influence in those processes through co-creation and in a way that they're acknowledged as equal collaborators. So that's just some thoughts from our whānau here. We wish we could tell you about the prototypes because they're pretty awesome. And
do you want to go another 5? You can put it off for another 5, a few minutes if you want a little bit more time for whānau to share a bit more. If you guys want to put it all a little bit more, okay, bye.
I think they've had enough. Yeah.
Well, good.
I think they're good. Maybe have we got time for feedback or nah?
Yeah, what we can do. Thank you so much. Firstly, just ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. This was really awesome to have you guys join us, and I know you're managing the tech and everything there as well, so we could totally hear you all good. So thank you so much. If you're happy to just hang around, and what we'll do, if people want to drop any pātai, any questions that you might have for whānau in the comments, and either now or a little bit down the track, they may have an opportunity to respond. what we'll do is we'll drop into a small, we'll drop into the breakout rooms just to have a bit of a conversation about the kōrero that we've just heard. And if we've got time, and Angie and whānau want to respond to a couple of the thoughts that come out, then ka pai. Otherwise, they'll also take the opportunity to potentially come back to us on some of the things that get raised down the track. So we'll jump in, just have a 10-minute conversation and a breakout about what you've heard and what came up for you, what stood out from that conversation, and then do drop any questions you have in the chat. And if there's an opportunity just to draw out one or two of the things, or dive into one or two of the things when we come back for a few minutes, we'll do that before we wrap up for the morning. So Brooke, if you want to drop people back into the breakout groups, and then we'll just come back and have a little check-in before we finish up. Is that okay, Ange? So we'll see you in 10 minutes or something, and if it works out, we have a little bit more kōrero, otherwise you can follow it up after.
Okay, see you guys in 10 minutes.
Kia ora. Awesome, kia ora, thank you. Great, and we've still got everybody. Oh yeah, cool. Okay, whakakura marae, I can see you in there. Awesome, so we just have a few minutes left, and what we want to do, there was one question that came up just before we went out, so we can go to that one, but if you have other questions, drop them in the chat, and if we get time to do it and now we've probably got time for a couple of questions, then great, and if not, then there'll be an opportunity for us to either hear from everyone again down the track, or they might share a video with us in response to those. So do drop questions in the chat if you have them. But there was the first question that was dropped in before from Joy around interested to know what the things were early on that felt different about this approach and gave you confidence in it. So Angie, do you want to invite any of the group to talk to that pathway?
Yes, Coles is going to talk to that.
Kia ora. Kia ora.
So what was different about this rōpū compared to others? I think it was more the whanaungatanga. For me, it was Celia and Angie. Just the way they approached us, it wasn't overbearing where you had to do something. So it was more at your own pace. They didn't push you or force you to be a yes, sorry. But yeah, that's how I felt. The difference between another rōpū and ours.
For me, it was different because we really worked on the whanaungatanga and getting to know each other, and that was done at every session, no matter what, and it brought us closer together. And it was, for me also, was Angie and Celia. They made us feel safe. They gave us this safe space to share. They, you know, and also the environment we were in. We were at the marae. We weren't at a government-based agency like Working Income, for example. Yeah, so it was, for me, it was being at a different environment, having people around that we knew that we could trust. So yeah, but in saying this, I'm so grateful because this whole experience actually got me my job here at Papakura Marae. So I am now a staff member at Papakura Marae, and I'm so grateful for that. Thank you.
I'm the opposite to Coles. She says she wasn't forced. I hated doing whanaungatanga. I was forced. But I am glad because I wouldn't have got to know any of these ladies. I like the part where we get asked how we would want things seen, and our opinion is wanted, not just told this is what we need done, this is how you're going to do it. We get asked how would we do it, what's something different that we would want to put in there, and they take that into account, and then we all kind of discuss it and see which way would be better, not just being told how to do everything.
Right, yeah, if you want to talk about that. I see, I understand there's a question about, tell us about the prototype. Yeah, we'd really like to do a little session on the prototypes, but shall I just give a little intro to the one that we've just done, and if you fellas want to add in, we've got to give Penny some time to close up. But so our first prototype was based on an insight here from our whānau in Papakura to say that some whānau are socially isolating as a protective factor. So their past experiences have been so traumatic with agencies and system, they now isolate themselves, not just from agencies, but also from community and even their own whānau. And so what we wanted to figure out was, what's the invitation, just like the invitation to come into this process, what does the invitation need to look like for us to invite those whānau who are socially isolating into relationship, into trust, into power? And so we developed with agencies something called He Kite Aroha, which was a kite of resources focused on child development, so games and balls and things that you could do with your young children and primary age children, and something for parents. And what we learned about that is that the kite is just the way to be able to connect, but what we're really interested in is how we scale manaakitanga and whanaungatanga in our community, because that's one of our core strengths. We do want to look after each other, we do want to help each other, and we want to build networks of pro-social relationships. So it's not about the kite, it's about how we create a whānau to whānau invitation into relationship and pro-social connections and build their social capital. And what we think the potential of that prototype is, those resilient, supportive whānau networks can be the first port of call for whānau, instead of waiting until they're needing an intervention or a service. And we're not sure how to scale that, guys? This is the whole thing about innovation in the design process, is that all we know is that we've distributed 56 kite here in our community. We've connected with more than 200 whānau here from our little rōpū. And what we know is that we think being able to create safe spaces and positive connections for our whānau is one of the most powerful things we can do to help whānau heal. Did you guys want to add anything? No, we got it? Got it? The tricky part about that prototype is we're about to do a walkthrough with agencies this month and talk about our learnings from that prototyping process, and then also try to figure out if we think it's working, so how can we do more of it? How can the agencies help us do it? But also this really amazing prototype around our whānau saying, agencies, the people inside of our local agencies have amazing experience, expertise, social capital that we want to draw on. And quite often we're not able to do that because our agency staff are required to deliver a service in a way to a code of conduct, and it means often they can't do the whanaungatanga or connect with whānau. But what our whānau have said is that they want all of that human capital that's sitting in local agencies to be unleashed, really, and to support whānau in the way that is useful for whānau, not necessarily through a service. We're not sure how we're going to do that either. but we're going to talk to agencies about what that might look like. Yeah, so that's just two of our prototypes, and we're still learning, and we're not sure, but we're on the waka for our tamariki, and that's what keeps us moving forward. We hand it back to you now, Penny.
Awesome. Kia ora, thank you so much. That was just really awesome. And like we said last time when you came in, we just should spend the whole day listening to you, and we could keep talking for ages. So hopefully we can connect in again. And there's some questions in here, particularly around the invitation and how do you, create the invitation in ways that makes difference, that matters and is sits right. And so maybe that's something that you guys could think about reflecting on a bit and sharing what your perspectives and experiences of that have been at at a different time. And also just for the folks that are on the line, there's an opportunity to connect again. In a few weeks' time, we're going to have a conversation specifically about reciprocity and how that actually sets up and what does that look like. So I'll share the details of that if people want to come back and have more of a conversation with He Whānau Whānui o Papakura. Thank you so much again for your time, for your preparation, for your effort, for your whakaaro, for your generosity. Everyone here is just really appreciates that opportunity. So we'll see you again. Thank you for your insights to carry us forward into the rest of our conversation. So, and thanks, Ange, and anyone else who's Celia behind the laptop that we can't see. Awesome. So what we'll do, I'm just going to ask people, one of the things, there's lots of questions that coming up for people and have come out, but and there'll be things that people can take out of this in lots of different ways. One of the, I guess, just notes is, it's not about everybody being able to work necessarily in the way that this ropu is working. I know not everybody is having this particular context. Everybody's context is different. But some of the things that we're hearing through the korero of Angie and the whānau is around power shifting and just thinking about whatever space we're working in, are we enabling the conditions for this? Because so many of our service and program responses that are set up to enable well-being are not necessarily thinking about some of the things that we've just heard matter in terms of building social connection, opportunities to heal, opportunities to lead, opportunities to connect. Are we thinking about the things that whānau and communities are saying, this makes the difference for us for well-being when we're structuring wherever we are in the system? And sometimes those power expressions are in places that we're not looking and not noticing. It could be very small places, like at the bottom of the contract in the intellectual property section, where the lawyers are looking after that, but it talks about who gets to own the stories or the things that are shared. That's an expression of power that's really profound. And if we don't look at that and question it and start agitating around it, then all we're doing is retaining a status quo. So I think the ways that we can pick up on how we're enabling and negotiating the issues of equity happen all across the system. So whether you're close to working on the ground in this way or you're creating enabling conditions in different ways, there is hopefully something that you're kind of hearing and being able to think through in this conversation. So what we would really like people to do is just pause for a second, and then there's going to be a Slido link. I know we've covered a lot of territory today, so just let it sort of float around, let the things that stay, and the things that float off. They'll come back if they're significant. You'll have the overnight test, which just lets things happen in the background, which is really, really important to kind of processing and making connections. But if there's a link in the Slido to, I think it's coming, to just one thing that you'll take forward from today. So of all the things that might be sort of sifting around in there, just pull out one thing that you'll take forward from today. I'll just give you a minute to think about that and then drop something in the Slido. So some of the responses coming out here around shifting power, positive unintended consequences, everyone having equal mana, ways to share power, moving at the speed of trust, which I'm sure people have heard before, considering about the language, that's something that's accessible to us every day that we make decisions about that can reinforce or create space for different kind of conversations. Healing and capability, potential of the process. So we're going to talk more about that in the next module around design for capacity and capability rather than designing for things. Decentralizing power, relationships being key, what whānau want matters, and the power of genuine partnership, which I definitely think you can feel it, what the power of genuine partnership is, rather than necessarily even having it described as a set of conditions. You can feel it when you hear it. So that almost brings us to a close. I just want to let everybody know, again, say thank you to everybody that's contributed today for your time, for your whakaaro. I'm hoping that you have started to make some connections with others again. And tomorrow we're joined by Tukona Te Raki from Ngāi Tahu, so it's their Māori Futures sort of innovation collective. They'll be sharing their Māori future making initiatives, world practices learning with us tomorrow morning. So we'll see you at the same time, 9:30. And I'm just going to hand over to Baruch, if he is there, to close for us this morning. Kia ora, Baruch.